back to discuss Initiative 1634. This measure would ban potential local taxes on food and sweetened beverages. Seattle has a sweetened beverage tax, and the industry is not happy about it. Our guests are Brandon Hersey, Federal Way teacher, who favors Initiative 1634, and State Senator Reuven Carlyle of Seattle, who is no fan of this measure. Brandon, we start with you. Please give us a quick explanation of what Initiative 1634 is and why we need it.
Well, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I am so excited to have this conversation with you, especially on a school night because I don't have to grade any papers. But my name is Brandon Hersey, like the candy bar without the second H, for those of you who might be wondering. And I am a teacher down in Federal Way, but I'm a resident here in Seattle, and I am here tonight in favor of 1634, which would prevent local governments from taxing groceries. Now, what is clear and what I would like to note is that 1634 has no effect on Seattle's soda tax. In fact, this is much bigger than soda. This is much bigger than Seattle. This is about having an equitable conversation about making this state more affordable for the most vulnerable people living in this state. And I am here speaking on behalf of my students and the families that I work with every day who are struggling to make ends meet.
Senator Carlyle, what's wrong with Initiative 1634?
Well, thank you as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone tonight. Look, 1634 is the most egregious initiative in a generation. It's an abuse of the initiative process, and it's a made-up political narrative from Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper. And that's why they're on target to spend $20 million to make sure that no more cities outside of Seattle can move forward with a soda tax. We have to acknowledge the fact that this initiative makes Tim Eyman look like a teddy bear fight. This is a national movement to prohibit local soda taxes around the country. They're introducing legislation in virtually every state, and they're doing initiatives in the rest of them. So that's what this is really about, and look forward to the conversation.
So we have to clear up something here about the use of the word groceries, and this is to you, Senator. Groceries are used in the ads and in the initiative. There is some footwork here on this kind of wording. Why is this so confusing?
The reason it's confusing is that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper have done hundreds of thousands of dollars of marketing research, and the word groceries tests at about 80 to 90%, and the word soda pop tests at about 10 to 20%. So the fact of the matter is that it's politically popular to pretend like there's a threat that there's going to be grocery taxes. Does anybody here to pay grocery taxes in Washington State? Well, it's been illegal since 1977. So what this is about is soda taxes. And what this is about is stopping the momentum of progressive cities like Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, other cities around the country from moving forward with soda taxes, despite the fact that it's the recommendation of the World Health Organization, and countries around the world are implementing soda taxes to invest in childhood nutrition.
Can I respond really quickly to that?
Yeah,
I think that it's incredibly short-sighted to think that these talking points focusing in on big soda have anything to do with the lived experiences of the students in my classroom, the Boy Scouts that I mentor every week, and the people of color in marginalized communities who are living in one of the most regressively taxed states in this nation, and to think that we are focusing in this important conversation and limiting it to the discussion of who is funding this initiative rather than the people who are struggling. I have students in my classroom this year who are experiencing poverty, who experience hunger, who are experiencing so many other things that I shudder to think about if I went through when I was a child. And that is because we are willing to tax basic necessities like groceries. This is not just about soda. This is preventing local municipalities and local governments from taxing things like meat, poultry, and other things that we would all find essential.
Well, in 1977, the people of this state outlawed taxation on meat and poultry and other food.
And I'd like to speak to that point as well. They outlawed a sales tax.
Absolutely. And since 1977,
does the soda tax? Does the soda tax
can I just
implement sales tax?
Brandon, hang on a second.
If I could, just for a second.
Sure,
Since
absolutely.
1977, sales taxes on groceries in Washington state have been illegal. For 41 years, there has not been one bill introduced in the Washington state legislature, and there's about 3,000 bills a year introduced. There's not been one public initiative to tax what human beings would traditionally call food. There have been proposals to tax soda. And that's what this is about. It is about soda. And the fact is, there is no political risk, there is no policy risk, and there is no reality on the front lines of any taxation of groceries. It's a made-up political problem designed by soda in order to prohibit soda taxes.
Brandon, so why are groceries included? Explain it to us.
Absolutely.
Because this is clearly a hot
The
topic.
tax that the senator would have you believe, or the measure, rather the law that the senator would have you believe, is that there is not the ability in Washington state currently to place a sales tax on groceries. However, there is a loophole in the law that has been affirmed by the Attorney General's office that you can place a tax on distributors. What's to stop another municipality or local government from placing that same tax on distributors? And to be clear, those distributors pass that tax down to the consumer.
Well,
so how do you reconcile that?
Isn't that sort of a straw man argument, the fear that something could happen but hasn't?
It's not a straw man argument in the sense that it's happened right now. They've exploited this loophole. The soda tax exists. And what's to say that that doesn't happen in a place like Federal Way? What's to say that doesn't happen like in a place like Spokane? What's to say that that doesn't happen and continuously puts a student or a young person or a marginalized person in a position to where they have even less of what are considered to be incredibly finite resources in this state. And we are coming from a place of privilege even having this discussion. I'm really, really saddened by the fact that we're limiting and conflating this argument to be about soda when this is truly and unequivocally about preventing local governments from taxing groceries.
If it's not about soda, why not leave soda out of the initiative then?
It's not about soda in the sense that, that's a really good question. I'm not, right. So I'm a teacher. I am not the policymaker, and I'm not speaking here on behalf of Big Soda. I'm not speaking here on behalf of anyone but my students and the families that I work for every day, right? I think that what the key point here is whether soda is left in the initiative or not, that the takeaway is that with Washington State's regressive tax structure, there have got to be better ways to solve these huge problems that so many families are experiencing, rather than taxing the most vulnerable people in order to fund local programs. I think that there have to be better ways.
So let's talk a little bit about justice, and I appreciate going to the core of that issue. African Americans in this country are 50% more likely to be obese. 2/3 of the people in this country are overweight. The World Health Organization is fanatical about the direct nexus, the direct cause of soda pop to obesity, to poor public health. Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, extraordinarily poor health outcomes, low-income communities of color. There is a dramatic and a real and an academically valid peer-reviewed proof that the soda companies have disproportionate advertising targeted at communities of color. Targeted at communities of color. So let's talk about the fact for just a second that 98% of the money in this initiative, they're on track to spend $20 million. $20 million they're on track to spend. They've got $13 million so far. Of that money, it is 98% from these three companies. And I would say that 37% of African American youth in this country drink 3 or more soda pops a day. This is the sugar content of 3 or more a day. 22% of Hispanic youth, 3 or more a day. This is 450% of the daily recommended. Obesity is a national and international crisis. It is real. Local governments are the only entity that the soda industry doesn't have political control of. In the state legislature, we're lucky to pass a bill declaring it anti-soda month. I mean, it's not going to happen. Congress is in the pocket of the soda industry. They're one of the largest political donors in this entire country. Local progressive cities are the only entity. And where this proposal comes from is pinpointed to 1972. It comes from a company called RJR Nabisco. It was designed by the cigarette industry, and the real reason we're here tonight and having this dialogue and talking about up to $20 million is the fact that the cigarette industry created the model and that soda is modeling this preemption legislation on. That's why we're here.
Before we move on, I just want to say that I find it incredibly misleading and offensive as a African-American person having this conversation with you. I come from one of the poorest states in this country. I grew up in Mississippi, where resources are as scarce as you could imagine. And moving here, I have seen more poverty in Federal Way, more poverty across the mountains than I ever saw in Mississippi. And you know, those sociological impacts of what poverty does in this state. We have one of the most prosperous states in this union. We have one of the wealthiest states in this country. But yet, we rank below Mississippi in closing the opportunity gap for our students simply because the wage and wealth disparities for communities of color and their counterparts are so large. If you want to have a conversation, a patriarchal conversation at that, about what is more important and what is healthy to put in a person's body, I would argue that it's more important to think about what can we do to think more creatively about helping these communities without taxing these communities. What can we do to think more creatively about not perpetuating and propagating a regressive tax structure that leaves the most vulnerable communities in this state paying more?
They're going to throw me out of here if I don't go to NATALIE, Brandon, and a question on Twitter.
I'm just wondering, and I'd like to hear from both of you, what can we glean so far from Seattle's recently passed soda tax?
Absolutely. What we can glean so far is that we raised an exponential amount more money than we expected. We are on track to raise about 10.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing if we raised more? We raised
I think
more,
that it's
meaning people are paying the tax.
Right. Well, when you reconcile that with the idea that this disproportionately affects people of color and low-income communities, we're raising this tax on the backs of the people that we're aiming to help. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, actually, quite easily, because the fact of the matter is that under the leadership of Tim Burgess and the city, the folks who
Tim Burgess is here?
Is here.
Yeah,
under the leadership.
Council member,
the real
mayor.
issue is not just the tax side, but what are we doing with the money? Yes, this has raised money. It is going to some of the most innovative childhood nutrition programs and early learning for the youngest, most vulnerable students and young people in this city.
But you're taxing their families in order to pay for that?
Yes, because just
so you are taxing.
We are taxing everybody because it is a discretionary item. Soda pop is a discretionary item, and the fact of the matter is it is a direct causational relationship with obesity that has disproportionate impacts on communities of color.
So the use of the money,
so the use of the money really matters, and we're spending it wisely on childhood nutrition, early learning, and high-value programs that are making a profound impact statewide.
And NATALIE.
I do have a Twitter
coming.
question from Pat Rhodes. He asked, does I-1634 define what can or cannot be taxed?
No. Groceries in all forms are off the table with I-1634. We just believe that essentials like meat, poultry, things that we all consume and find to be healthy are not available to be taxed.
Under the initiative in 1977, soda pop was exclusively left out, so it could be taxed. We do have a syrup tax in the state of Washington that we actually do at the statewide level, but because the state legislature is so generous with tax breaks, we actually give the money back to the industry. So we tax them and then we give it right back to them. So the fact of the matter is that what this really does is it's actually a reverse loophole. It actually closes the loophole so that we can no longer tax soda, and it has nothing to do with meat, nothing to do with poultry or anything like that. Those are already eliminated.
It's known in state law as the privilege tax and has to do with distribution.
Exactly.
So is there a way to guarantee that groceries could not be subject to a privilege tax as state law is currently written?
Well, of course. But
is there a law to do that? Or is there an initiative
we could pass
to
that
do
in.
that?
I would suggest that bill would pass the legislature. It might take about 7-8 minutes to get that passed. Very easy to do. The fact is, this is a model bill. This has nothing to do with this perceived loophole. This is a model bill that's being introduced in states all over the country. There's an initiative in Oregon to do it right now. This is designed by the American Legislative Exchange Council and companies, the soda industry nationwide, to stop local progressive cities
Brandon,
from taxing.
I do want to get into the nationwide part of this because, as the senator said, there's an initiative on the ballot in Oregon. California Governor Jerry Brown struck a deal to avoid something like this. And so, what is the expanse of this nationwide?
And you know, I would love to have that conversation, but I don't get paid to do that type of research. I'm a teacher, right? I have an expectation to show up and teach my second graders math and reading tomorrow. I think if you have that type of question, you should ask the campaign or even ask Senator Carlyle. But I think what's more important here is that I'm focused on Washington State. I'm focused on Federal Way. I'm focused on the other cities that stand to lose the most if this measure does not pass. And I wholeheartedly believe that I-1634 is a step in the right direction in ending a regressive tax structure that the senator is supporting.
Well, I would just suggest, as the former chair of the Finance Committee, I know a little bit about taxes, and I would suggest that every time we tried to introduce any type of progressive taxes, that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper were among the leading companies opposing any type of progressive tax reform in the state of Washington, and that's been approved, in fact, for the past 20 years. I would just note, if I could, for just a second, that I think it's important to recognize that we are here in the end because since 2003, for 15 years in a row, Coca-Cola Company has formally submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission filings which says that the #1 risk to their revenues is the association of their product with obesity. The #1 threat to their revenues. We are here because soda is extremely price elastic. So as the price goes up, people stop buying. You've seen a dramatic reduction in England, in France, in Colombia, in Mexico, 12%, countries all over the world. And it's the same thing in the United States. And that's what Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper are so terrified about. And that's why they're willing to spend $20 million in Washington State. And as for your comment, which I appreciate you being here with absolute due respect, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper have 364,000 employees. The fact that they couldn't make one available to debate their $20 million initiative is a disappointment, I think, to the people of Washington.
Because this is not about soda. I don't know how many times we have to I don't know how many times we have to go back over this. This is about groceries. And it's...
I have a question to get to.
Sure,
Excuse me.
absolutely.
Sarah Toomey has a question on Twitter, and this will be for Senator Carlyle. Is there evidence that soda taxes are effective in terms of health outcomes? Do they disproportionately impact poor and minority communities?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. How you spend the money matters. The investment of those dollars in childhood nutrition, which is the formal recommendation of the World Health Organization. So how you spend the money matters. And then the prices,
And
the
just
price
to be clear,
elasticity.
though, that would be up to individual cities.
Correct.
And local jurisdictions.
Correct. How those dollars are spent really matters, and I think it makes sense for those local communities to make those decisions themselves.
But you didn't answer the piece about disproportionately affecting communities of color.
This is a product, just like tobacco, that I think we have to exercise great caution in artificially lowering the price that doesn't capture the true cost to health, to society, and to communities. This product is cheap today because the federal government subsidizes with corn subsidies to $20 billion a year. The number one of the largest ingredients in soda pop is artificially low because of federal crop subsidies. So it's not just about our little corner of the world in Seattle. This is about geopolitics of the soda industry and their political power.
Senator, I got to bring in an audience question. Hello, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, my name is Martha Burke. My question is, in the city of Seattle, who is most affected by this in terms of the stores? What I wonder is if this is more affecting like the small grocery stores, like, owned by immigrants, like the local bodegas and the 7-Elevens, and how do we account for that?
I can speak to that. So let me kind of break this down. The Seattle soda tax is a tax on distributors, right? And it hits not only major corporations like Safeway, who can eat that tax, but also those mom and pop grocery stores that can't. So as a result, they have to raise their prices and then pass those prices in those tax pieces onto the consumer, which are largely people of color and low-income communities. Now, the difference there is that if we have a big problem with major corporations having a stake in politics, we're really not really being as equitable to both small business owners who are losing customers and some of the most marginalized people in this state.
Hey, Brandon, when we met, you told me that you don't drink soda pop. How come?
Well, I don't really know what that has to do with this conversation.
Because we're talking about soda pop.
Well, I'm not talking about soda pop. I'm talking about groceries.
Well, a whole bunch of folks here are talking about soda pop, so I'd like you to answer that question.
Well, I think that it's, frankly, to me, a little sad that we're wasting time in this conversation about what I personally choose to put in my body, especially when there are so many hungry children across Washington state. But to answer your question, I don't drink soda because, frankly, I don't like to drink sweet things at all. And I actually read a Facebook post the other day that said that because I like bitter things like black coffee, IPA, and rare meat, I might be a sociopath, so.
Okay, one last audience question. We're running out of time. Real quickly, and say who your question's for. Tight question, tight
My question is for the senator. It seems like those that are for this initiative are assuming that it will be applied to more than beverages. Is there any evidence or even some other kind of thing that says that Seattle will actually be doing that? Do you know of any reason? Is Seattle going to do that? And if not, it seems like the people who are voting yes for this should know that it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to move on to meats and other things.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it's a made-up political problem. If it wasn't, the word groceries is popular. If it wasn't this issue, it would be something else. The fact of the matter is the cost, according to the National Council of State Legislators, for taxpayers in Washington state to deal with the problem of obesity is $2.9 billion a year. And the fact of the matter is that cost is being borne by taxpayers and by society. What we're trying to do in standing up for the right of local cities to have authority is the ability to recognize that we need to capture those costs. And instead of the taxpayer paying for it, let's try to embed that cost in this product, and let's try to be much smarter about this as a society.
Thank you both. We have been talking loudly with Brandon Hersey and State Senator Reuven Carlyle. Next up, putting a price on carbon.